Why would a waitress know a song that was never released to the public? The question would leave an entire ballroom silent before the night was over. The Grand Lexington Hotel shimmered beneath 1,000 crystal lights. Champagne glasses clinked softly. Expensive shoes crossed polished marble floors. Laughter floated beneath the sound of a string quartet playing near the stage. It was the kind of charity gala where every table carried a name people recognized. CEOs, investors, politicians, athletes. The city's most influential faces had gathered beneath one roof. Yet among them moved someone nobody noticed. Claire Bennett balanced a silver tray against her palm as she crossed the ballroom. Her black uniform blended into the background so perfectly that most guests never looked directly at her. They looked through her. It wasn't new. Claire had spent years becoming invisible. Invisible was safe. Invisible paid the bills. Invisible kept questions away. She stopped beside a table near the ballroom's center and quietly replaced an empty water glass. The guests continued discussing acquisitions worth hundreds of millions of dollars without acknowledging her presence. Claire offered a polite smile anyway. Then she moved on. Near the stage, a group of photographers suddenly shifted position. Camera flashes erupted like tiny bursts of lightning. Conversations lowered. Heads turned. Ethan Blackwell had arrived. The founder and CEO of Blackwell Technologies carried the kind of reputation that filled rooms before he entered them. At 38 years old, he had built one of the fastest-growing technology companies in America. His interviews made headlines. His investments moved markets. And tonight, he was the guest of honor. As Ethan stepped into the ballroom, applause rippled through the crowd. He shook hands, smiled for cameras, accepted congratulations with practiced ease. But despite the attention surrounding him, there was something distant in his expression, something tired hidden behind the confidence. Claire noticed it immediately. Most people only saw the billionaire. Claire saw the man carrying a weight nobody else seemed to notice. Then something caught her eye. As Ethan adjusted his jacket sleeve, the ballroom lights reflected off a silver watch resting against his wrist. Claire froze. Only for a second. Her fingers tightened around the tray. Her breathing slowed. The watch looked familiar. Not because it was expensive, not because it was rare, but because years ago she had seen that exact watch somewhere she never expected to remember. Ethan continued greeting guests, unaware that a waitress across the room had suddenly stopped moving. Claire lowered her eyes and forced herself forward. Keep walking. Keep working. Keep invisible. Yet the image remained in her mind. The silver watch. The dark blue dial. The tiny scratch near the edge of the frame. Impossible, she thought. It couldn't be. Across the ballroom, Ethan laughed politely at a joke he barely heard. Then, for reasons he couldn't explain, his gaze drifted across the crowd. For a brief moment, his eyes met Claire's. Neither spoke. Neither smiled. But something unexpected passed between them. Recognition. Not of a face. Not of a name. Something older. Something unfinished. And before either of them could understand why, the lights above the stage suddenly flickered. The brief flicker lasted less than a second. Most guests barely noticed it. A few glanced upward before returning to their conversations. The musicians continued playing. Waiters continued moving between tables. The evening appeared untouched. Yet behind the stage curtains, tension spread quickly. Claire heard it first. A hurried voice. Then another. The event coordinator rushed across the hallway, clutching a tablet against her chest. Her expression had changed completely. The calm smile she had worn all evening was gone. Claire stepped aside to allow her through. As she passed, two words drifted through the air. She canceled. Claire continued walking, but her attention sharpened instantly. Years of working events had taught her something important. The most important conversations were usually whispered. Near the service entrance, several staff members had already gathered. Their voices remained low, but panic carried easily through silence. "What do you mean she is not coming?" one man asked. "Her flight was delayed. Then canceled. She cannot make it. The performance starts in less than 40 minutes. "I know." Claire placed a tray onto a preparation table and quietly returned to work. She had no reason to involve herself. Problems like these belong to other people. Important people. People on stages. Not people carrying water glasses. Yet the tension lingered in the room. The gala's featured performer had been advertised for months. Sponsors had paid enormous sums. Guests expected a memorable finale. Without it, the evening risked ending in disappointment. Claire moved toward the ballroom again. The chandeliers cast warm reflections across the marble floor. At the center of the room, Ethan Blackwell stood surrounded by executives and investors. Everyone wanted a moment of his attention. Everyone wanted something. Claire noticed how easily he handled them. A smile here, a handshake there, a polite laugh. Yet whenever he thought nobody was watching, the smile disappeared. It was subtle, but it was there. She recognized that kind of exhaustion. The exhaustion of carrying expectations. Across the ballroom, Ethan's attention drifted again. His eyes found Claire for the second time that evening. Strange, he thought. He did not know her. Yet something about her felt familiar. Not her face, not her voice. Something deeper. Something impossible to place. Before he could think further, one of his executives approached with concern written across his face. Ethan listened carefully. The executive spoke quietly. Ethan's expression hardened almost immediately. Whatever he heard was not good news. Claire looked away and continued serving a nearby table. But she could feel the shift in the room. Small signs appeared everywhere. Organizers whispering. Staff moving faster. Phone screens lighting up. A problem was growing behind the elegant curtain of the evening. Near the stage, Claire paused beside a grand piano decorated with white roses. Her reflection stared back from the polished black surface. For a moment, she saw a different version of herself. A younger woman. A different life. Different dreams. Then she looked down. Her fingertips rested lightly against the piano's edge. Instantly, a memory surfaced. Bright stage lights. A rehearsal room. Sheet music. Applause. She pulled her hand away. No, that life was over. It had been over for years. Claire straightened her shoulders and returned to work. Invisible. That was the plan. Across the ballroom, the event coordinator suddenly climbed onto the stage. Her face was pale. Her smile looked forced. And when she reached for the microphone, an uneasy silence slowly spread through the room. The room grew quiet one table at a time. Conversations faded. Champagne glasses lowered. The soft music from the quartet came to an end as every eye turned toward the stage. The event coordinator stood beneath the spotlight, gripping the microphone with both hands. Her smile remained in place, but barely. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice carrying across the ballroom. "Thank you once again for supporting tonight's foundation." A few guests nodded politely. Others checked their watches. Near the front of the room, Ethan Blackwell remained seated, his attention fixed entirely on the stage. He already knew something was wrong. The coordinator took a breath. "Unfortunately, due to circumstances beyond our control, tonight's featured performer is unable to join us." A wave of disappointment moved through the audience. Not loud, just enough. Chairs shifted. Expressions changed. Sponsors exchanged glances. The coordinator quickly continued. "We are working on an alternative program and appreciate your patience." She stepped away from the microphone as polite applause scattered across the room. It was the kind of applause people gave when they did not know what else to do. Behind the curtains, the atmosphere changed immediately. Phones rang. Staff members hurried between rooms. Voices became sharper. Claire carried a tray of sparkling water through a side hallway and nearly collided with a production assistant rushing in the opposite direction. "Sorry," he muttered before disappearing around a corner. She continued forward. Invisible. Unnoticed. Safe. Yet the memory of the grand piano lingered in her mind. So did the watch. She hated that. She had spent years learning how not to look backward. Looking backward always hurt. Near the ballroom entrance, a wealthy donor snapped his fingers without looking up from his conversation. Claire approached calmly. "Another coffee," he said. No greeting. No eye contact. Claire nodded and walked away. She did not take it personally anymore. People often revealed themselves when they believed someone beneath them was listening. And tonight, many people were revealing exactly who they were. Across the room, Ethan excused himself from a conversation with investors. He moved toward a quieter corner near the stage. His chief operations officer joined him almost immediately. "This is becoming a problem," the executive said. Several sponsors specifically came for the performance. Ethan glanced toward the ballroom. "Then find a solution." "We are trying." Ethan rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. Trying and succeeding are different things. The executive nodded and hurried away. Ethan remained standing alone for a moment. The ballroom looked perfect from a distance. Crystal chandeliers, white roses, elegant tables, smiling faces. Yet beneath the surface, The entire evening was beginning to crack. His gaze drifted again. Somehow it always found the same person. Claire was crossing the room, carrying a tray. Nothing about her stood out. Yet something felt strangely familiar. Ethan watched as she stopped to help an elderly guest adjust a chair. She smiled warmly, said something kind, then moved on without waiting for recognition. Most people at the gala wanted to be noticed. She seemed determined not to be. Ethan found himself curious. Backstage, the coordinator's stress was becoming impossible to hide. Nobody, she asked. Not one replacement. A producer shook his head. Nobody who can handle a room like this. Claire heard the exchange while placing clean glasses onto a service cart. She paused, only briefly. Her fingers rested against the edge of the cart. The same feeling returned. The same memory. Stage lights. Music. Applause. Her heartbeat quickened. No, not again. That chapter was finished. It had to stay finished. Then a voice echoed through the hallway. If we cannot find someone in the next 20 minutes, the entire closing program is gone. And for the first time that evening, Claire stopped walking. Claire stood motionless beside the service cart while the hallway buzzed around her. Staff members hurried past carrying clipboards, cables, and half-finished solutions that were already falling apart before they reached the ballroom. Nobody noticed her. Nobody asked what she was thinking. That was how it had always been. She lowered her eyes toward the polished floor. 20 minutes. That was all they had left. 20 minutes before hundreds of guests walked away remembering the failure instead of the cause they had gathered to support. The thought should not have mattered to her. She was there to serve drinks, collect empty glasses, and finish her shift. Nothing more. Yet something deep inside refused to let the moment pass. A familiar ache stirred in her chest. The ache she felt whenever music found a way back into her life. Claire took a slow breath and returned to the ballroom. The crowd looked different now. Not because anything visible had changed, because she could feel the disappointment settling over the room. Conversations had become thinner, smiles less genuine. The energy that had filled the evening was slowly slipping away. Near the stage, the grand piano sat untouched beneath the spotlight. Waiting. Claire looked away immediately. Across the room, Ethan Blackwell watched another sponsor leave early. The man offered polite excuses, but Ethan understood the truth. People remembered experiences. They remembered emotions. And tonight was drifting in the wrong direction. He glanced toward the stage, then toward the event coordinator, then toward the exits. Every instinct that had helped him build a billion-dollar company told him the same thing. The evening needed a turning point. Fast. As Ethan considered possible solutions, his attention caught movement near the ballroom's edge. Claire was standing quietly beside a service station. For a brief moment, she appeared completely still. Not nervous. Not distracted. Thinking. Ethan frowned slightly. It was strange. He could not explain why he kept noticing her. Before he could examine the feeling further, another executive approached with bad news. We have called everyone, the executive said. Performers, musicians, local talent agencies. Nobody can get here in time. Ethan nodded once. Then stopped looking for perfect. What? Find someone capable. The executive hesitated. There is nobody capable. Ethan looked toward the stage again. There is always someone. Meanwhile, backstage, the coordinator rubbed her temples. Her carefully maintained professionalism was beginning to crack. I cannot believe this is happening, she whispered. A few staff members stood nearby exchanging worried looks. Claire stepped closer than she normally would. Not enough to draw attention, just enough to hear. The donors expected a headline performance, someone said. Without it, tomorrow's coverage will be brutal. I know. Silence followed. Then Claire spoke. Her voice was soft, almost lost beneath the noise around her. Maybe I can help. Nobody responded at first. One producer continued scrolling through his phone. Another adjusted an earpiece. Then the words finally registered. Several heads turned toward her. The coordinator blinked. Excuse me. Claire immediately wished she had stayed silent. Old instincts told her to step back. Apologize. Disappear. Yet something stronger kept her standing there. I said maybe I can help. The room stared. One producer laughed before he could stop himself. Not cruelly. Simply out of disbelief. Help how? Claire glanced toward the stage. Toward the piano. Toward the microphone waiting beneath the lights. Her heartbeat quickened. Years seemed to collapse into seconds. I can perform. The hallway became completely silent. Then someone smiled politely. Someone else looked away. And the coordinator's expression made one thing painfully clear. Not a single person believed her. For several seconds, nobody said anything. The coordinator stared at Claire as if she had misheard her. One producer exchanged an amused look with another. A sound technician lowered his clipboard and studied the waitress standing quietly in front of them. Claire could almost hear what they were thinking. A waitress. At a gala. In front of donors, executives, and reporters. The idea sounded ridiculous even to her. Yet she did not take the words back. "You can perform?" the coordinator finally asked. Claire nodded once. "Yes." Professionally, the question landed harder than expected. Claire hesitated. Not because she lacked an answer. Because the answer belonged to a life she rarely allowed herself to remember. "A long time ago," she said softly. One of the producers folded his arms. "What exactly do you do?" "I sing." Another silence followed. Then came the polite smiles. The kind people offered when they wanted to avoid being rude. The coordinator glanced at the clock on the wall. 15 minutes remained. 15 minutes before the closing segment was supposed to begin. She wanted a solution. But she wanted a believable solution. Claire Bennett did not look like one. Her black service uniform only made the situation seem more absurd. The producer cleared his throat. "Thank you for volunteering. We appreciate it. But this room is different. There are hundreds of guests out there." Claire nodded. "I know. There are sponsors. I know. National media. I know." The producer forced a smile. "Then you understand why we cannot take that risk." Claire lowered her eyes. She had expected that answer. In truth, part of her had wanted that answer. Rejection was familiar. Safe. Rejection allowed her to return to work and pretend she had never spoken. Yet before she could step away, another voice entered the conversation. "What risk?" Everyone turned. Ethan Blackwell stood at the end of the hallway. Nobody had noticed him approaching. The coordinator straightened immediately. "Mr. Blackwell." Ethan looked from the coordinator to Claire. "What is happening?" The producer answered quickly. "We are discussing alternatives for the performance." And the producer hesitated. She believes she can help. Ethan's gaze settled on Claire. Once again, that strange feeling returned. Familiarity without explanation. He studied her expression. She was not nervous. Not exactly. She looked like someone standing at the edge of a memory she had spent years trying to escape. "You perform?" he asked. Claire met his eyes. "I used to." Ethan noticed something important. She did not sound ambitious. She did not sound desperate for attention. Most people jumped toward spotlights. Claire looked as though she was trying to avoid one. That made him curious. "What kind of music?" Ethan asked. "Classical. Contemporary. Whatever the room needs." The answer surprised everyone. Especially because she said it without hesitation. Ethan glanced toward the stage beyond the hallway. Then back to Claire. "How many people have you performed for before?" A faint smile touched her lips. Not proud. Not defensive. Just honest. "More than this." The producer almost laughed. The coordinator looked unconvinced. But Ethan kept watching her. Something about the certainty in her voice did not match the uniform she was wearing. It matched something else. Something hidden. Across the ballroom, guests continued talking, unaware of the conversation unfolding behind the scenes. The clock continued moving. 14 minutes. Then 13. The coordinator sighed heavily. "Even if we wanted to consider this, we have no proof." Claire remained silent. The producer nodded in agreement. "Exactly." Then a new voice suddenly emerged from behind them. Old. Calm. Certain. "Actually," the voice said, "I believe I have heard her sing before." The hallway fell silent again. Everyone turned toward the source of the voice. An elderly man stood near the backstage entrance, leaning lightly on a polished wooden cane. His silver hair reflected the overhead lights, and although his tuxedo was simple compared to many guests in attendance, his presence carried an authority that immediately changed the atmosphere. The event coordinator blinked. "Mr. Whitaker?" Several staff members straightened at once. Even Ethan Blackwell recognized the name. Samuel Whitaker was one of the most respected conductors in the country. For more than 4 decades, he had directed orchestras in New York, Chicago, Boston, and Los Angeles. He rarely attended public events anymore. Yet tonight, he was one of the foundation's honored guests. Samuel's eyes remained fixed on Claire. Not curious. Not doubtful. Certain. "I know that face," he said quietly. Claire felt her heartbeat stumble. "No. Not here. Not tonight." Samuel took a few slow steps forward. "It has been years," he continued. but I remember talent when I hear it. The producer looked confused. You know her? Samuel smiled faintly. If she is who I think she is, then yes. Claire lowered her gaze. The hallway suddenly felt much smaller. The coordinator looked between them. Mr. Whitaker, are you saying she can actually perform? Samuel did not answer immediately. Instead, he studied Claire with the expression of someone opening a book he had once loved but not seen in a very long time. Young lady, he said softly. Tell me I am mistaken. Claire remained silent. Tell me you are not Claire Bennett from Carnegie Conservatory. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The producer's jaw tightened. The coordinator stared. Ethan's attention sharpened instantly. Claire closed her eyes for a brief moment. The name felt strange now. Carnegie Conservatory belonged to another lifetime. A lifetime filled with practice rooms, recital halls, competitions, and dreams that once seemed inevitable. It was a long time ago, she said quietly. Samuel's smile grew. So it is you. The hallway erupted with questions at once. Wait. Carnegie Conservatory? The scholarship student? What is happening? Claire wished she could disappear. She had spent years making sure nobody asked those questions anymore. Yet there was no escaping now. Ethan watched her carefully. For the first time all evening, pieces began moving into place. The confidence, the calm, the strange sense that she belonged somewhere else. Why are you working as a waitress? Someone asked before realizing how inappropriate the question sounded. Claire offered no answer. Samuel did not press her. Instead, he turned toward the coordinator. You wanted proof. He gestured toward Claire. There it is. The coordinator looked overwhelmed. Mr. Whitaker, with all respect, attending a conservatory years ago is not the same as performing tonight. Samuel nodded. That is true. Then he looked at Claire again. Which is why there is a very simple solution. Claire already knew what he was about to say. Let her sing. The producer hesitated. We do not have time for additions. Samuel checked his watch. Then perhaps 10 seconds is enough. Ethan folded his arms. 10 seconds. Samuel smiled. 10 seconds is all real talent needs. Every eye turned toward Claire. The coordinator waited. The producer waited. Ethan waited. Even the sounds of the ballroom beyond the hallway seemed distant now. Claire felt years pressing against her shoulders. Years of silence. Years of avoiding stages. Years of pretending music no longer mattered. Then Samuel asked one final question. Claire, he said gently, are you still afraid of your own voice? Claire could not answer immediately. Samuel Whitaker's question lingered in the air long after the words were spoken. Are you still afraid of your own voice? Nobody moved. Nobody interrupted. Even the coordinator seemed unwilling to break the silence. Claire stared at the floor. The polished marble reflected the ballroom lights above her. Tiny fragments of gold shimmered beneath her shoes. For years she had convinced herself that music belonged in the past. It was easier that way. Easier to carry trays than expectations. Easier to serve rooms full of strangers than stand in front of them. Easier to disappear. Yet standing there now, surrounded by people waiting for an answer, she realized something uncomfortable. The fear had never left. It had simply become quieter. Samuel watched her patiently. Ethan watched her differently. He was no longer looking at a waitress. He was looking at a mystery. A conservatory student. A performer. Someone who clearly possessed a story nobody else knew. Claire finally lifted her eyes. I am not afraid of singing, she said softly. Samuel smiled. Then what are you afraid of? Claire swallowed. The answer came before she could stop it. Being seen. The hallway became still once more. The honesty of the response affected everyone differently. The coordinator looked surprised. The producer looked confused. Samuel looked sad. Ethan looked thoughtful. Because for the first time that evening, he understood something about her. She was not hiding because she lacked confidence. She was hiding because she had once lost something important. Samuel nodded slowly. That makes more sense. Claire looked away. I should get back to work. No, Samuel replied gently. You should decide whether you want to keep running. The words landed harder than any criticism could have. Claire felt years of memories stirring beneath the surface. Rehearsal halls, auditions, standing ovations, then silence, long silence, the kind that changes a person. Before she could respond, the coordinator checked her watch again. 10 minutes. Only 10 minutes remained. The pressure returned immediately. We do not have time for this, she said. We need an answer. Samuel nodded. Then give her the microphone. Mr. Whitaker, 10 seconds. The producer sighed heavily. And if she freezes? Ethan answered before anyone else could. Then we lose 10 seconds. Everyone turned toward him. Ethan shrugged slightly. We are already out of options. The coordinator hesitated. Logic fought against desperation. Finally, desperation won. She handed a wireless microphone to Claire. 10 seconds, she said. Claire stared at the microphone resting in her hands. It felt heavier than it should have. Not because of its weight, because of everything it represented. Samuel stepped back. Ethan folded his arms. The producer looked unconvinced. A few nearby staff members gathered quietly. Nobody spoke. Claire raised the microphone slowly. Her heart pounded. Her palms felt cold. She closed her eyes. For a brief moment, the hallway disappeared. The ballroom disappeared. The years disappeared. There was only music. Only memory. Only a voice she had spent too long silencing. Then she sang a single note. One note. Pure. Clear. Effortless. The sound traveled through the hallway like light through glass. Nobody breathed. Nobody moved. Even the distant noise from the ballroom seemed to fade away. Claire opened her eyes. The note ended. Silence followed. Complete silence. Then Samuel Whitaker smiled. The coordinator's mouth fell open. The producer lowered his clipboard. And Ethan Blackwell felt a strange chill run through him because he suddenly realized he had heard that voice before. The silence after the note seemed impossible. It lasted only a few seconds, yet it felt much longer. Nobody rushed to speak. Nobody laughed. Nobody questioned what they had heard. The sound had answered every doubt before words could. Claire slowly lowered the microphone. Part of her wanted to hand it back immediately and walk away. Return to the ballroom. Return to the trays and glasses and quiet corners where nobody asked questions. But the expressions surrounding her had changed. The coordinator no longer looked skeptical. The producer no longer looked amused. Even the staff members standing near the hallway entrance stared at her with open surprise. Samuel Whitaker's smile widened slightly. There she is, he said softly. Claire looked down. It was only one note. Exactly, Samuel replied. And look what happened. Ethan Blackwell remained silent. He could not explain the feeling settling over him. The note itself had been beautiful, but that was not what disturbed him. It was the familiarity. Somewhere in the back of his mind, a memory had begun moving. Small at first, almost impossible to grasp, like hearing a melody through a closed door. He knew that voice, or thought he did. The coordinator finally found her voice. Can you do the full performance? Claire hesitated. The answer should have been simple. Yes or no. Instead, it felt like standing at a crossroads she had spent years avoiding. I think so, she said honestly. Samuel laughed quietly. That means yes. The producer looked toward Ethan. What do you think? Ethan's eyes remained on Claire. I think we are out of reasons to say no. The coordinator released a long breath. Decision made. All right. She pointed toward the stage. You go on in 7 minutes. Claire's heartbeat immediately accelerated. 7 minutes. Suddenly, everything became real. It was no longer a hypothetical conversation. No longer a memory. In 7 minutes, she would stand before hundreds of people. 7 minutes before the spotlight found her. 7 minutes before being invisible ended. The coordinator hurried away to adjust the program. Staff members rushed toward their positions. The hallway erupted with motion once again. Yet Claire remained frozen. Samuel stepped beside her. You still have time to run, he said with a gentle smile. Claire laughed softly despite herself. That is not helping. Good. Samuel nodded toward the ballroom. Then stay. Across the room, Ethan watched the exchange carefully. Something continued pulling at his memory. A voice. A song. A distant moment he could almost reach, but not quite. He glanced toward Claire again. Then toward the silver watch on his wrist. For a brief second, another memory surfaced. A rainy night nearly 10 years earlier. A small apartment. A pair of headphones. A recording somebody had anonymously shared online. A song with no name attached. A voice that had somehow carried him through the hardest year of his life. Ethan frowned. Impossible. Thousands of singers existed in the world. Thousands of voices. Yet the resemblance felt unsettling. Before he could think further, the ballroom lights dimmed slightly. A signal from the production team. The closing segment was about to begin. Guests returned to their seats. Conversations quieted. Camera operators moved into position. The grand piano waited beneath the spotlight. Claire stood at the edge of the stage entrance, staring at the audience beyond the curtain. Hundreds of faces. Powerful faces. Important faces. People who had ignored her all evening. Her palms felt cold. Her breathing slowed. Then Samuel stepped close enough for only her to hear. "Do not sing to impress them," he said. "Sing the way you used to." Claire swallowed. "And if they do not like it?" Samuel looked toward the stage and smiled. "Claire, I am far more interested in what happens when they do." The ballroom lights dimmed further until only the stage remained fully illuminated. Conversations dissolved into whispers. Hundreds of guests shifted their attention forward, expecting an announcement, a revised schedule, perhaps an apology. Nobody expected what was about to happen. The event coordinator stepped onto the stage with a composed smile that looked far more confident than she felt. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "thank you for your patience this evening. We have made a small adjustment to our program." A few curious glances spread through the audience. Near the front row, Ethan Blackwell sat perfectly still. His eyes remained fixed on the empty stage. Something inside him felt unsettled. The coordinator continued. "Tonight, we would like to introduce a special guest performer." She paused briefly. Claire Bennett. Silence. No applause. No recognition. The name meant nothing to anyone in the room. Several guests exchanged confused looks. A sponsor glanced at the program booklet. The name was not listed. Somewhere near the back of the ballroom, someone quietly asked, "Who is that?" Then Claire stepped into the light. The room barely reacted. She was still wearing a simple black dress borrowed from the event staff wardrobe. Elegant enough for the stage. Modest enough to remain unnoticed. To most guests, she looked nothing like the performer they had expected. She looked ordinary. The kind of person they had walked past all evening without remembering. Claire crossed the stage slowly. Every step echoed inside her chest. The spotlight followed her until she reached the grand piano waiting beneath the chandelier glow. The audience watched politely, patiently, skeptically. Claire could feel it. Years ago, that feeling would have terrified her. Tonight it felt different. Not because the fear was gone, because something else had finally become stronger. She sat at the piano bench and placed her hands lightly in her lap. For a moment, she simply looked out across the ballroom. Hundreds of faces. Wealth. Influence. Success. Yet beneath all of it, she saw something familiar. People carrying invisible burdens. People searching for meaning in rooms full of noise. People not so different from herself. Backstage, Samuel Whitaker watched quietly. A small smile rested on his face. Ethan remained motionless. The strange memory continued pulling at him. Closer now. Sharper. Almost within reach. Claire inhaled slowly. Then she placed her fingers on the piano keys. The first notes floated into the ballroom. Soft. Gentle. Almost fragile. The room remained restless for a few seconds. A glass touched a table. A chair shifted. Someone checked a phone. Then the melody continued. Richer now. Warmer. Every note carrying a quiet confidence that needed no introduction. One by one, distractions faded. Conversations stopped. Heads lifted. The room began listening. Claire closed her eyes. The years disappeared. The fear disappeared. The expectations disappeared. There was only the music. Only the story hidden inside it. When she finally began to sing, the effect was immediate. Her voice rose above the piano with effortless clarity. Not loud. Not dramatic. Simply beautiful. The kind of voice that made people stop whatever they were doing because it felt honest. A woman near the center table slowly lowered her champagne glass. A reporter stopped typing. A sponsor leaned forward. The entire ballroom seemed to hold its breath. Ethan felt his pulse quicken. The first lyric struck something deep inside his memory. Then another. Then another. Suddenly the rainy apartment returned. The headphones. The anonymous recording. The voice that had once carried him through sleepless nights and impossible decisions. Ethan's eyes widened. His gaze locked onto Claire. Because he was no longer wondering whether he had heard her before. He knew he had. And the realization changed everything. Claire continued singing, unaware that one man in the audience was no longer hearing the Gala performance. Ethan Blackwell was hearing a decade-old memory. The melody unfolding across the ballroom was identical to the recording he had nearly forgotten. 10 years earlier, before the headlines, before the company, before private jets and boardrooms, Ethan had been a young entrepreneur on the edge of failure. Investors had walked away. Friends had doubted him. Sleep had become a luxury. During those difficult months, he had stumbled across a simple recording online. No artist name, no promotion, no explanation, just a voice accompanied by a piano. Somehow that unknown singer had become part of his darkest nights. He had listened to the recording hundreds of times. Then one day it vanished. The account disappeared. The song disappeared. The singer disappeared. Yet the voice had never left him. And now she was sitting 20 yards away beneath a chandelier, singing as though the years between had never happened. Around him, the ballroom remained completely captivated. The transformation was impossible to ignore. Guests who had questioned the replacement performer now leaned forward in their seats. Phones remained untouched. Conversations were forgotten. Even the waitstaff had paused discreetly near the walls. The music seemed to slow time itself. Claire felt the shift without opening her eyes. The room was listening, really listening. Not because of her name, not because of fame, because for the first time in years she was no longer hiding behind silence. Every note carried a piece of the person she used to be, the person she thought she had lost. Her fingers moved across the piano keys with growing confidence. The fear that had followed her onto the stage was fading. In its place came something else. Freedom. Backstage, Samuel Whitaker stood with his arms folded and a quiet satisfaction in his eyes. He had seen countless performances throughout his career. Technically perfect singers, world-famous musicians. Yet what moved audiences most was never perfection. It was truth, and Claire was giving them truth. The final verse approached. The melody softened. The ballroom became so quiet that the faint hum of the air conditioning seemed loud. Claire opened her eyes and looked across the crowd. Hundreds of strangers stared back, but she no longer felt judged. She felt understood. The final note floated upward and lingered beneath the crystal chandeliers. Then it faded. Silence followed. 1 second. 2. 3. Claire lowered her hands from the piano. Her heart pounded. The old fear tried to return. Maybe they hated it. Maybe they were simply being polite. Then a single sound broke the silence. Someone stood. Claire turned her head slightly. Ethan Blackwell was on his feet. He began applauding. Slowly at first, then more firmly. The sound echoed through the ballroom. Another guest stood. Then another. Then another. Within moments, the entire room rose together. The applause became thunderous. People who had ignored Claire all evening were now looking directly at her. Not at a waitress. Not at a background figure. At her. Claire felt emotion rise unexpectedly in her chest. She blinked quickly and smiled. Across the stage, Samuel Whitaker nodded once, as if to say what she already knew. She had not returned to music. Music had returned to her. But the biggest surprise of the evening had not happened yet, because Ethan Blackwell had already made a decision. The moment the applause ended, he was going to ask Claire Bennett a question that would change both of their lives. The standing ovation continued far longer than anyone expected. Guests who had arrived expecting a routine charity gala now found themselves part of something unforgettable. The applause rolled through the ballroom like a wave. Claire remained seated at the piano for a moment, almost unable to process what was happening. For years she had imagined this scene. Then she had spent even more years convincing herself it would never happen. Yet here it was. Real. Human. Impossible to ignore. She finally rose from the piano bench and offered a modest smile. The spotlight followed her as she stepped away from the instrument. Part of her wanted to leave the stage immediately. Old habits were difficult to break. Attention still felt unfamiliar. But before she could reach the curtain, Ethan Blackwell moved. He crossed the ballroom floor without hesitation. Guests instinctively stepped aside. Conversations quieted once again. Cameras turned toward him. The most powerful man in the room was walking directly toward the woman nobody had noticed 3 hours earlier. Claire stopped near the edge of the stage. Ethan climbed the short staircase and approached her. For a second, neither spoke. The ballroom watched, waiting. Ethan looked at her carefully, not with curiosity anymore, with certainty. "I know that song," he said quietly. Claire blinked. "What?" "Not just the song." Ethan shook his head slightly. "Your voice." Claire felt a small knot form in her stomach. Very few people knew about those recordings. Fewer still remembered them. Ethan continued. 10 years ago, there was a recording online. No artist name. No promotion. Just a piano and a singer. Claire's expression changed instantly. The room could not see it. Ethan could. "You remember it," he said. Claire looked away. "That was a long time ago. It was you." The statement was not a question. Around them, guests exchanged puzzled looks. They had no idea what conversation they were witnessing. Ethan smiled faintly. "You have no idea how many times I listened to that recording. Claire stared at him. You heard it. Ethan laughed softly. Hundreds of times. For the first time all evening, Claire seemed genuinely surprised. Ethan glanced toward the audience before lowering his voice. That song helped me through one of the hardest years of my life. Claire did not know what to say. The idea felt impossible. For years, she had assumed those recordings had disappeared without leaving any mark behind. Ethan continued. I always wondered what happened to the person who sang it. Silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable. Thoughtful. Then Ethan asked the question he had been carrying since the performance ended. What happened? Claire looked toward the ballroom. Toward the chandeliers. Toward the hundreds of people who suddenly knew her name. Her answer came slowly. Life happened. Ethan nodded. He understood that answer better than most people would. Samuel Whitaker watched from the wings with a knowing smile. The story was finally beginning to surface. Claire took a breath. My mother became sick. Ethan listened carefully. Scholarships disappeared. Opportunities disappeared. Bills did not. A few guests standing near the stage overheard enough to understand. Their expressions softened immediately. Claire shrugged lightly. So I found work. Then more work. Then years passed. There was no bitterness in her voice. No resentment. Just honesty. Somehow that made the story even more powerful. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. Then he glanced toward the audience. Many guests still stood watching, waiting, listening. And suddenly Ethan realized something important. The most remarkable thing about Claire Bennett was not that she had talent. It was that she had carried extraordinary talent through years of difficulty without becoming bitter. Before he could respond, a voice called out from the audience. Tell them the rest. Samuel Whitaker had stepped forward. And the look on his face made Claire realize that a secret she had spent 10 years hiding was about to become impossible to hide any longer. The ballroom remained completely silent after Samuel Whitaker spoke. Hundreds of eyes shifted toward the elderly conductor. Claire closed her eyes briefly. She knew exactly what he meant. The secret was not dangerous. It was not scandalous. It was simply something she had spent years refusing to discuss. Because speaking about it made everything feel real again. Samuel walked slowly toward the stage. His cane tapped softly against the floor. Each step seemed to carry another piece of history with it. When he reached Claire and Ethan, he turned toward the audience. Many of you are hearing Claire Bennett for the first time tonight, he said. I had the privilege of hearing her 10 years ago. The room listened carefully. Samuel smiled. Back then, she was considered one of the most promising young musicians I had ever met. A ripple of surprise moved through the crowd. Claire lowered her gaze. Samuel continued. Talent is common. Discipline is rare. Grace is even rarer. Claire had all three. Several guests exchanged glances. The woman standing before them no longer fit the story they had created in their minds. She was not simply a waitress who happened to sing well. She was someone who had once stood on the edge of an extraordinary future. Samuel looked toward Claire. Do you remember your final conservatory recital? Claire nodded slowly. Yes. Samuel laughed softly. I remember people standing in the aisles because every seat was taken. More surprised whispers spread across the ballroom. Ethan watched Claire carefully. Every new detail felt like another missing piece falling into place. Samuel turned back to the audience. After that performance, multiple opportunities appeared. Scholarships, contracts, invitations. He paused. Then everything changed. Claire's expression softened. Not with sadness, with acceptance. Samuel continued. When her mother became seriously ill, Claire made a decision. The room grew quiet again. She walked away from every opportunity. A sponsor near the front frowned slightly. All of them. Samuel nodded. Every single one. The sponsor looked stunned. Samuel smiled gently. Some people measure success by what they gain. Claire measured success by who she refused to abandon. Claire felt emotion rise unexpectedly in her chest. She had never viewed her choice as heroic. It had simply been necessary. Family came first. That was all. Ethan looked at her with growing respect. In his world, people often sacrificed relationships for ambition. Claire had done the opposite. And somehow she had done it without bitterness. Samuel continued. For years she worked. Quietly. Consistently. Without asking for sympathy. He looked around the ballroom. And tonight, many of you walked past her without realizing who she was. The truth landed heavily. Guests glanced toward Claire with new understanding. They remembered accepting drinks from her. Walking past her. Ignoring her. The realization humbled them. Samuel smiled warmly. Do not feel embarrassed. That is the lesson. He gestured toward Claire. Talent does not always arrive wearing a spotlight. Silence followed. Then something unexpected happened. An elderly woman near the front table stood and began applauding. Another guest joined her. Then another. Within seconds, the entire ballroom was standing once more. But this applause felt different. The first ovation had celebrated a performance. This one celebrated a person. Claire looked across the crowd and felt something she had not experienced in years. Not recognition. Not admiration. Belonging. Ethan glanced toward Samuel. You were right. Samuel smiled. About what? Ethan looked at Claire. The room was never waiting for a famous performer. Samuel nodded knowingly. No, Ethan's eyes remained on Claire. It was waiting for her. And as the applause echoed beneath the chandeliers, Claire realized that the life she thought had ended 10 years ago might not be over after all. The applause gradually softened, but the feeling inside the ballroom remained. It lingered beneath the chandeliers. It lingered in the smiles of strangers. It lingered in the silence between conversations. Some nights were forgotten before they ended. This would not be one of them. Claire stood at the center of the stage and looked across the room. Earlier that evening, she had moved through the same crowd, carrying trays and refilling glasses. People had looked past her. Some had not looked at all. Yet standing there now, she felt no desire to prove anyone wrong. That surprised her most. Years ago, she might have wanted recognition, validation, a chance to show the world what it had missed. But standing beneath the warm lights, she realized something important. Her worth had never disappeared. The world had simply failed to notice it. And those were not the same thing. Ethan Blackwell stepped beside her once more. This time there were no cameras demanding attention. No speeches. No announcements. Just two people sharing a quiet moment after a remarkable evening. Ethan smiled. You know, most people spend their lives trying to be seen. Claire laughed softly. I spent mine trying not to be. Ethan nodded. And somehow that is exactly why people listened. Claire looked across the ballroom again. She could see guests talking with Samuel Whitaker. Others were sharing stories, exchanging phone numbers, making donations to the foundation. The energy of the room had transformed completely. What had nearly become a disappointing ending had become the most meaningful moment of the night. Samuel approached slowly, his cane tapping gently against the floor. Well, he said, smiling warmly. I believe the room finally caught up with you. Claire shook her head with a small laugh. You always did know how to say things at exactly the right time. Samuel's eyes softened. No, tonight you did. For a moment, none of them spoke. The silence felt comfortable, complete. The kind of silence that comes after something true has finally been spoken aloud. An hour later, the ballroom had nearly emptied. Staff members folded table linens. Florists gathered centerpieces. The musicians packed away their instruments. Claire stood near one of the tall windows overlooking the city. Rain had begun falling lightly beyond the glass, turning the skyline into a field of soft reflections. Ethan joined her one final time before leaving. What happens next? He asked. Claire considered the question carefully. For years she had feared it. Tonight she welcomed it. I do not know, she admitted. But for the first time in a long time, I am curious to find out. Ethan smiled. That sounds like a good place to start. They shook hands. Nothing dramatic. Nothing rushed. Just mutual respect between two people whose lives had unexpectedly crossed paths. Then Ethan walked away. Claire remained by the window for another moment, listening to the rain. 10 years earlier, she had believed she was walking away from her future. Tonight, she understood something different. Sometimes life does not take your dreams away. Sometimes it simply asks you to carry them longer than you expected. And when the moment is finally right, they find their way back to you. Claire smiled softly and looked out at the city lights. The same voice she had once hidden had filled an entire ballroom. Not because she demanded to be heard, but because she finally stopped hiding. And perhaps that is the quiet truth most people spend years learning. The world changes the moment you stop apologizing for who you are. If this story reminded you of someone whose quiet strength deserves to be seen, share their name in the comments. And if you believe that kindness, dignity, and hidden talent still matter, consider joining us for another story. Sometimes the people the world overlooks are the ones who leave the deepest echo.